I planned the entire trip, every single part of it: the cabin rental, the kayak tours, the grocery order that would be waiting for us when we arrived. I even called ahead to make sure the property had a fire pit because my mom had mentioned once, maybe 2 years ago, that she always wanted to do s'mores by a real fire on a real vacation. I remembered that. I wrote it down. I built a trip around it. And then my brother decided his girlfriend needed to come, and that I needed to leave. Let me back up. I'm a data analyst. I've been working at the same company for 4 years, and I'm good at what I do. I'm the person in my family who has a 401k and actually puts money in it. I have a spreadsheet for my grocery budget. I track my subscriptions and cancel the ones I don't use. None of this is remarkable, I know. But I'm telling you this because it matters for understanding how something like this trip happens. I don't do things halfway. When I decide to do something, I research it, I plan it, I execute it cleanly. Last year, I decided to take my family on a trip. It wasn't spontaneous. I'd been thinking about it for a while. My parents had never really had a proper vacation when my brother and I were growing up. We did a few road trips here and there, a couple of nights at a motel near the beach once, but nothing real. Nothing where they could actually relax, and now they were getting older. My dad had retired. My mom was still working part-time but talking about stopping. I looked at them at Christmas and thought, if not now, when? So I started planning in February for a trip in July, 5 months out. I found a lake house in the Adirondacks, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a full kitchen, a dock, a fire pit, a screened-in porch with rocking chairs facing the water. The rental was $2,800 for the week. I paid the full deposit myself without mentioning it to anyone because I wanted it to be a surprise. I also started setting aside money each month for groceries, activities, gas. By the time I told my family about the trip in April, I had already spent close to $1,200 out of pocket and had another $1,600 to go. They were thrilled. My mom cried a little on the phone. My dad said, "You didn't have to do this," which is the thing he always says when he's genuinely touched. My brother texted me a string of emojis and said he was in. The four of us. 5 nights, that was the plan. In the weeks after I announced it, something shifted in the energy of my family. My mom started sending me links to hiking trails near the lake. My dad asked about fishing licenses and whether the dock had a good spot for casting. My brother texted me a playlist he made for the drive. It felt like something I hadn't felt in a long time, like we were all moving toward the same thing, together. I won't pretend our family is perfect. My brother and I have always had a complicated dynamic. He's 3 years older than me and was, for most of our lives, the one who got more of everything, more attention, more leniency, more benefit of the doubt. He crashed a car at 19, and my parents called it an accident. I got a speeding ticket at 22, and they lectured me for a month. I don't say this with resentment anymore. I've mostly made peace with the fact that this is just how it was. But I say it so you understand that this trip felt, to me, like a chance to just be a family without all of that history pressing down on us. I bought a card for my parents. Inside, I wrote that I hoped this week could be something we all looked back on. I meant it. Then, 6 weeks before we were supposed to leave, my brother called me. He had met someone. 3 months ago, apparently. Her name was Audra. He really liked her. They had been spending a lot of time together. He thought this trip would be a perfect opportunity for all of us to meet her. I said, "That's great. We can all have dinner when we get back." He said that wasn't what he meant. I asked him what he meant. He said he wanted to bring her on the trip. I was quiet for a second. I did the mental math automatically. 3 bedrooms, 4 people. Me, my brother, mom, dad. The numbers already worked perfectly. Adding a fifth person meant either someone was sharing a bed who hadn't planned to, or someone was on the couch, and I already knew where this was heading before he said it. Someone was giving up their room. I said, "The cabin only has 3 bedrooms." He said, "Yeah, I know. I figured you and I could share." I was 31 years old. I'd planned this trip for 5 months. I'd paid for it. And my brother was asking me to share a room like we were 12 because he wanted to bring someone he'd been dating for 3 months. I took a breath and said I'd think about it. I didn't say yes. I said I'd think about it. That distinction matters to me now, even though it didn't seem to matter to anyone else. The next day, my mom called me. She had already talked to my brother. She said she thought it would be really nice for us to meet Audra, and that this kind of trip was exactly the right setting for that, relaxed and low-key, no pressure. She said my brother really cared about this girl. She said, "You're flexible, honey. You've always been flexible." I asked her when she had decided I was flexible. She laughed like I was joking. I wasn't joking. I told her I needed to think about it and I'd get back to her. She said, of course, and then mentioned, almost as an aside, that my brother had already told Audra about the trip and Audra was really excited. So the decision had already been made, apparently. I just hadn't been told yet. I spent the next 2 days sitting with this. Not stewing, exactly, more like processing. I made a list because that's what I do. On one side, I wrote the reasons to just say yes. It's 1 week, it's not worth the conflict. Maybe Audra is great, maybe this could still be a good trip. On the other side, I wrote the truth. I planned this trip. I paid for it. I was being asked to give up my bedroom in a house I rented to accommodate a woman I had never met, and no one had asked me if that was okay. They had told Audra before they asked me. The list wasn't close, but I also knew my family. I knew that if I said no, I would be the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who couldn't just go with the flow. My brother would be annoyed. My mom would be disappointed. My dad would say nothing, but there would be a particular silence from him that I know too well. And the trip I had spent 5 months planning and thousands of dollars on, would become about my unwillingness to be a team player. So, I said yes. I said yes because I was tired and because I didn't want to fight and because I have spent 31 years being the person who says yes so that everything stays smooth. I said yes, and I sent a text to my brother saying I was looking forward to meeting Audra, and he sent back a thumbs up emoji. 1 thumbs up. After everything, I kept planning. I finalized the grocery order. I added items I didn't know if Audra could eat because I hadn't met her and my brother hadn't mentioned any dietary restrictions, so I covered everything I could think of. I confirmed the kayak rental for 6 people instead of 4 because I'd already added Audra and figured one extra would be good for flexibility. I printed out a folder with the cabin check-in instructions, the local emergency numbers, the hours for the nearby farmers market, and a list of recommended restaurants within 20 minutes. I brought the folder to show my mom when I visited her the weekend before we left. She flipped through it and said, "You're amazing, you know that?" I smiled. I said thanks. What I didn't say was, "I know, and I'm exhausted by it." 4 days before departure, my brother called again. He said there was a situation. Audra had a dog, a rescue she'd had for 2 years. A medium-sized mutt named something I've already forgotten. Audra was uncomfortable leaving the dog for a full week because the dog had separation anxiety. The cabin allowed pets. I had confirmed this when I booked. But Audra was also wondering whether it would be possible to switch bedrooms because the room my brother had claimed was the one with the ensuite bathroom, and she preferred to have her own bathroom access in the morning. And would I be willing to take the smaller room in the back? I read the text 3 times. The smaller room in the back had one window and no closet. It was the room I had quietly designated for storage, extra bags, the portable speaker, the cooler for the dock. It was, functionally, not a real bedroom. I had looked at the photos of this cabin for hours. I knew every room. I put my phone face down on my kitchen counter and stood there for a minute. Then I picked it up and called my brother. He answered on the second ring, bright and easy, like he had no idea this was a problem. I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He said, "Okay." I said, "Is there any version of this where you understood what you were asking?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said I was being dramatic. I said, "I paid for this trip. I planned every part of it. I gave up my room for someone I've never met. And now she wants my bedroom too. And her dog is coming, and at what point did this become her trip?" He said she wasn't like that. He said I was making her into a villain. He said I was being unfair. I said, "I'm not saying she's a villain. I'm saying no one has asked me what I want since February." He said, "Come on, you love planning things. You do this because you like it." And there it was. The thing I had been waiting for someone to say without knowing I was waiting for it. I love planning things, therefore the plan belongs to everyone. I like doing this, therefore my preferences don't count. I am good at giving, therefore I don't need to receive anything. I said, I need a day. He said, okay, but Audra is kind of waiting to hear. I hung up. I sat down on my couch and I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because there's a version of this story where I cry, and I didn't. I was not sad. I was something colder and cleaner than sad. I was done. I pulled up the booking confirmation on my laptop. The cabin was booked under my name, my credit card. I was listed as the primary guest, and I had read when I booked that check-in required the primary guest to be present with a valid ID and the card used to make the reservation. I read that line again. I thought about my brother telling Audra she'd have the ensuite bathroom. I thought about my mom saying I was flexible. I thought about the thumbs up emoji. I thought about 5 months of spreadsheets and confirmation emails and a grocery order I had spent 45 minutes on for a woman I'd never met. I picked up my phone and called the rental company. The woman I spoke to was helpful and patient. I explained that I needed to cancel the reservation. She walked me through the cancellation policy. I would lose the deposit, which was $840, but the remaining balance of just under $2,000 had not yet been charged, so I would not owe that. I said I understood. She asked if there was anything she could do to change my mind, and I said no thank you, I had made my decision. I also called the kayak company and canceled the 6-person rental. Then I sat back and looked at my ceiling for a while. I didn't call my brother. I didn't call my mom. I sent one text to the family group chat, just my parents, my brother, and me, that said, I've had to cancel the trip. I'll explain when I'm ready. Please don't call me tonight. Then I turned my phone off. I want to tell you that I felt immediately at peace, but that would be a lie. What I felt immediately was a strange, hollow exhaustion, like I had been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and I had finally set it down, but my arms still ached from the effort. I made dinner. I watched something on TV that I cannot remember now. I went to bed. In the morning, I turned my phone back on. 47 messages, mostly from my brother. A string from my mom. 2 from my dad, which was unusual. My dad almost never texts. Both of which said some version of, please call us. My brother's texts moved through several phases. Phase 1 was confusion. Phase 2 was irritation. Phase 3 was something that almost looked like concern, but I know my brother, and what it really was panic, because he had told Audra they were going, and now he had to untell her. I read all of them without responding and then called my dad. He picked up on the first ring. I explained everything. From February to the thumbs up emoji to the request for the smaller room, I told him about the 5 months of planning and the deposit I had already lost. I told him about standing in my kitchen reading a text that asked me to sleep in a storage room in a cabin I had rented. My dad was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he said, I didn't know about the room situation. I said, I know, Dad. He said, your brother shouldn't have done that. I said, I know. He said, what do you need from me right now? And I almost broke at that. Almost. Because it was the first time in this entire process that anyone had asked me what I needed. I told him I needed some space. I told him I wasn't angry at him or Mom, but I needed a few days before I could talk to my brother. He said he understood. He said he loved me. I said I loved him too. I did not talk to my brother for 9 days. On the 10th day, he showed up at my apartment. I didn't let him in. We stood in the hallway of my building and had the conversation we should have had months ago. He said he understood now that he had put me in an unfair position. He said the thing about the room was too much to ask. He said he was sorry. He said Audra felt terrible about the whole thing. Apparently my brother had finally explained the full story to her and she was mortified, which I believe, because I don't think she was ever the real problem. She was just a person who was told she was invited and then learned later that it wasn't really anyone's invitation to give. I said, I know you didn't mean for it to go the way it did. He said, but it still went that way. I said, yeah, it did. We stood there for a second. The hallway is narrow, and there's a flickering light near the elevator that the building has been promising to fix for 6 months. It felt like a strange place to be relearning something about each other. I said, I need you to understand that I am not endlessly okay with being the one who adjusts. I do it because it's easier. But easier isn't the same as okay. He nodded. He looked like he was actually hearing me, which was something. The trip didn't happen. I lost $840. The Adirondacks had a perfect week of weather that July. Blue skies and low humidity every single day. I know because I checked morbidly every morning. My parents ended up taking a day trip somewhere local, which they said was nice but wasn't the same. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. The thing I come back to is earlier. I should have said, the moment my brother first asked, that a fifth person was not possible without my agreement. Not, I'll think about it. Not, let me get back to you. I should have said, right then, that this was a trip I had planned and paid for, and adding someone I had never met was not a given. I know some people think I should have just taken a friend instead of canceling. I thought about that. I genuinely did. But the trip was built around my family. The s'mores by the fire pit were for my mom. The dock was for my dad. The whole architecture of the week was built around the four of us, and by the time everything fell apart, I didn't have the energy to rebuild it into something else in 4 days. What I did instead was book myself a solo weekend in October. A small inn on the coast of Maine that doesn't allow pets and doesn't have group rates and doesn't require me to coordinate with anyone. I kayaked alone on a gray Saturday morning. It was cold and the water was choppy, and it was one of the best mornings I've had in years. My brother and I are okay now. Not perfect, but okay. Audra and I have actually met a few times since then, and she's genuinely nice. A little quiet, a little awkward around me still, which makes sense. We're not close, but I don't have anything against her. My mom still sometimes says I'm flexible, and I still sometimes let it go. But I'm getting better at saying quietly and without drama that I'm not, actually. That I'm a person with a preference. That the fact that I'm willing to work around things doesn't mean I don't have things to work around. My dad asked me last month if I'd ever want to try the Adirondacks trip again, just the four of us. I said maybe. I said let me look at dates. I haven't looked at dates yet, but I didn't say no. And for right now, that feels like enough. There's something nobody tells you about being the capable one in a family. People stop asking if you're okay with things. They just assume you are. They assume you'll handle it, adjust to it, absorb it, because you always have. And for a long time, I let that assumption stand because correcting it felt like more work than just going along. I lost $840 on that trip. I've thought about that number a lot, not because I can't afford it, but because of what it represents. That money was the cost of a lesson I kept almost learning and then not learning. The lesson that saying yes when you mean no doesn't make you generous. It makes you a resource. And resources don't get consulted. They get used. My brother isn't a bad person. I want to be clear about that, the same way I was clear about it standing in that narrow hallway outside my apartment. He made a series of choices that each seemed small and reasonable to him in isolation. Bring a girlfriend. Share a room. Switch bedrooms, each one manageable on its own. But what he never accounted for was that I was the one absorbing every single one of them, and there's a compounding effect to that. There's a point where the weight of all those small, reasonable requests becomes unreasonable, and by the time you feel it, you're already buried. What I did, canceling the reservation, going quiet, taking my 9 days, wasn't something I planned. I didn't sit down and strategize. I just finally reached the limit of what I was willing to swallow, and I acted from that place instead of from the place I usually act from, which is the place that asks, how do I make this easier for everyone else? And the thing is, nothing catastrophic happened. My family was upset. My brother was frustrated. There were 47 messages on my phone. But none of it was the disaster I had always imagined. None of it was the thing I had been quietly dreading every time I said yes instead of what I actually meant. The conflict I had spent years contorting myself to avoid turned out to be survivable. Uncomfortable, yes. Survivable, absolutely. I think about the solo weekend in Maine sometimes. The kayak on the gray, choppy water, the cold coming off the surface, nobody waiting for me on shore. There's a specific kind of clarity that comes when you stop performing your own ease for other people. When you stop being flexible and just are whoever you actually are in a given moment. I had forgotten what that felt like. I found it again in a small inn on the coast, completely alone, and it cost me a fraction of what the cabin would have. What I understand now, what I'm still learning, honestly, is that the people who love you can also take you for granted without meaning to. And the only thing that changes it is when you stop making it so easy for them to do. Not with anger, not with ultimatums, just by being honest about the limits you actually have instead of pretending you don't have any. My dad asked about the Adirondacks again last month. Just the four of us. I said maybe. I said, let me look at dates. I haven't looked yet. But I didn't say no. And for the first time in a long time, that maybe is actually mine.